Hello everyone, this is Tom Fox and I'd like to welcome you to episode 4 of Compliance Into the Weeds, a podcast with Matt Kelly and Tom Fox. In this podcast, Into the Weeds, Matt and I really take deep dives into some subject that has caught our interest. And this week's episode, we take a deep dive into big data and what it might mean for your compliance program going forward. Matt had the chance to read the book Planning for Big Data, a CIO's handbook to the changing data landscape, on a recent trip over to Moscow where he gave a speech. So we used that as a starting point to explore what the compliance practitioner needs to know about big data, how they might be able to get that big data out of their own company, and then how they might use that going forward. The episode comes in at just under 24 minutes. I hope you enjoy it, and thank you very much for listening. This is Tom Fox, and I'm back with Matt Kelly, and we are Compliance Into the Weeds. And today, Matt and I are going to talk about big data, GRC, and some related topics. So, Matt, welcome. Welcome back to America. I know you've been overseas. And how was your trip to Moscow?
It was very good, Tom. It's always great to be back talking with you here. But yes, I was in Moscow for 4 days at a Thomson Reuters GRC event where that was the first time I'd been over to Russia. And they had about 275 or 300 people who attended. And they're a very interested and very enthusiastic group about GRC. And they certainly pay a lot more attention to their own problems and their own Russian regulations, which is to be expected, but they had a keen interest in what else is going on in the West and just in compliance best practices overall. So it was a very enthusiastic audience over there.
So, Matt, you had a very interesting blog post on your site, Radical Compliance, this week entitled Recommended Reading for Big Data and GRC. And if I could first comment that from Tom Fox, the editor's perspective, I had wished you had led with this sentence. Big data is data that exceeds the processing capacity of conventional databases. The data is too big, moves too fast, and doesn't fit the strictures of your database architectures. Then you have a paragraph break where you say, those two sentences alone should get a compliance officer's brain cells firing. Well, it sure got mine firing, and I thought it would have been a great lead. So maybe if we could start with really that, because I really was intrigued by that sentence, because that to me encapsulated a full definition of big data, but also the usefulness and then the difficulty in just getting your arms around it to think through how I can use it.
Well, that is very true, and I would give a big shout to the author of this Planning for Big Data book, or ebook, I guess, that his name is Ed Dunbill, and you can get the book from O'Reilly for free. So, I happened to be reading that book on the plane over to Moscow, and it had probably been sitting on my iPad for a good 3 or 4 years. This book was published originally in 2012, and so I was looking for something to read. I happened to fire that up, and when he talked about how big data as a problem, how it exists, and it is too large for any single computing database or probably even physical computer to manage. That's where he was the one who said that it exceeds the processing capacity of conventional databases, and it's too big, it's too fast, it doesn't fit your architecture. And the light went on in my head that that's exactly the sort of challenge in data collection and management compliance officers have. They've got very odd and discombobulated streams of data that are coming to them that they have to worry about. You're looking at whistleblower hotline data, maybe. You're looking at results of internal audits. You're looking at training certifications, or maybe some sort of monitoring of your third parties. All of those pieces fit into a bigger mosaic, but unto themselves, they're, a training data and an internal audit results are not the same sort of thing that you can just cut and paste it next to each other in a Word file. It doesn't work like that. And it occurred to me, these are the problems compliance officers have. But the other part that kind of fired my brain cells was when he said that the technology is such, or the problem is such, that the technology has to run on multiple machines. And a lot of this book is more technical than I think you or me or most people listening to this would need to worry about. But he did say much of the time, you take what the big problem is, you chop it into small pieces, you put it on different computing processors, they solve bits of the problem, and they cobble it all back together into one answer. And then I started realizing this is actually about the tech platform that you're going to need to buy if you're a compliance officer, or build with your CIO or something. But you're going to have an intelligent conversation with the tech people about how this works. Is this a cloud thing? Is this distributed architecture? Is this on a central processor? I didn't study computer science. I barely understand this stuff. But when he phrased it that way, that's when I suddenly said, aha, that's why all these vendors talking about the cloud, they do make sense, hosting these things on the cloud, because otherwise you're going to host it in all sorts of computers in your data center, and your CIO is going to get annoyed, and the whole thing just kind of framed up for me. I could see now having much more experienced and well-versed conversations with GRC vendors about how they do what they do for you. And that's where I thought, compliance officers really could get a lot just from reading those two essays, that they would frame up your problem quite well.
Let me see if I can unpack a couple of those concepts. The first is that this is really data that's your data, or it's the company's data, so it's there somewhere. But the unpacking of it, how do you get to the data that is meaningful for your query or your inquiry as a chief compliance officer? Is it sales? Is it HR? Is it employee expenses? Is it vendor master list? Is it accounts payable? There's a wide variety of data. Mm-hmm. Does this give you any insight, or could you give some thoughts on how CCO might think about breaking down or breaking apart some of the data so that they can begin either a transaction monitoring or a transaction analysis component?
Yes and no. I would say the more important thing for a compliance officer, especially those who come from a non-technical or even a non-audit background, not to say that lawyers are not, wonderful people with sharp minds. They are. But if you're coming from a career where you spend more time thinking and writing, and you're worried about streams of data, this is not what, nobody taught data streams 101 in law school.
Right.
So it helped me understand the sort of questions you would need to be able to ask a GRC consultant, some sort of a vendor, maybe your IT person, that, you can think about what are the risks that we have. Okay, we've got a lot of third parties, so it's going to be a lot of monitoring. It's going to be a lot of looking at master vendor lists. It's going to be looking at a lot of maybe procurement data. How am I going to, what do I want to get from that type of information? What's the conclusion I want to reach? Then, frankly, this is where my no, I can't answer part comes in. Then you're going to have to talk with the IT people, whether they're a vendor, whether they are your own in-house IT people, but say, these are the piles of data that have the information I want. I know I'm going to need an answer that kind of looks like this, because here's my question. I want to get risk ranking updates on all of my vendors every 24 hours. And, the risks are these. So I know the information is going to come from these separate departments here. This is the type of data they generate. You, GRC IT person, you need to take that raw data, convert it into something for me. How they do that, to be honest, I don't know. I need to think about that a little more, but it's more that you need to understand there's a mosaic here, and it's okay for us, the humans, not to understand the individual pieces of data behind it. We're not interested in exactly what every tile in the mosaic looks like. We're interested in what the picture looks like. These essays really just help me understand it's a big collection of mosaic tiles that we're going to wind up trying to piece together the right way.
So one of the ways that I've thought through this is that you have a set of data and you develop a list of queries or inquiries of that data that would test anything that is above A or below Z. If it's between A to Z, it's within a range that you find acceptable. So you're really looking for anomalies. And if an anomaly pops up, which in my compliance practitioner hat would say an exception, but if an anomaly pops up, then that anomaly is flagged for further investigation. And then you would try to do that with the disparate types or disparate focuses of data. So perhaps one inquiry could be employee expense accounts. Do you have any above or a certain amount? And then try to wed that to other inquiries or other types of data, say maybe around your accounts payable to your third-party vendors. Are there any with commissions that were above the rate that the contract specified? If you can make that type of inquiry or analysis in the data you have, is that the sort of sense you were getting or thing you were seeing, or is my vision not what you were able to ascertain from reading this book?
Part of it, I would say, I would try to give maybe an even more complex example. I certainly agree that, one data analysis you might want is if it's in the range of $100 to $1,000, it's permissible. But another risk profile might not be the amount, it might be the geographic region. So if you've got your head of North America sales who suddenly is spending $1,200, that's one kind of red flag. But if your North America sales VP is suddenly spending $200, but he's doing it in the Middle East, that's a red flag. And I would say, that's potentially a lot more red than going a little bit over your limit in your geographic region. But the point is, you're looking for numbers in the first, seems like 100 to 1,000, and you're looking for geography in the second. Well, geography is not a number. So you would need some way to cobble together numeric and text data. Now, how you do that, that's how the big data vendors and the GRC scientists, and they come and they figure out how to do that. But it is helpful for the compliance officer to start thinking through, what's the type of information I'd need to be able to ascertain if my North America sales VP is behaving abnormally. And what might be a little bit abnormal in one way, you could see him doing something very different that also is much more abnormal in another way. If he spends a little amount of money in China when he shouldn't be spending any at all, that's a very different sort of a risk than, okay, he went over his limit by 2% here in North America. That's his job. So, being able to think through those kind of things. Or another example, you might want to look at HR data. I could see that being, personnel information. That would be very text heavy. Or if you are in financial services, you're doing employee surveillance of email communications or text messages. You're looking for keywords. But, if they don't use the keywords, but you do see a big spike in the travel and entertainment numbers, what does that tell you? The big data solution is going to take both of those piles of data and cobble them together into something a little more cohesive. What I came away with thinking, though, is that, okay, if that's what you want it to do, what's the actual conversation you have with your CIO about how are we going to do this? Right. Because that sounds very technical, that if you want to say, I need, you to build this from scratch across 4 different servers and 3 different ERP systems, your CIO is going to just, he's going to put your face on a dartboard and throw darts at it all day long. But it might help you understand. You can go to the CIO and say, I need a cloud-based solution for this. And I need to go outside, and it's going to have these data feeds go to the vendor. Maybe it won't. Maybe it will. But these essays helped me understand, okay, now I get the sort of conversations you're going to have with other people in your enterprise to make big data work for you.
So there was another line that struck me in your blog post. If I could just read it. It said, when done correctly, Dunbill says, big data helps people follow a loop. Observe, orient, decide, act. You can process piles of data, understand the meaning within them, decide what to do, and put that decision into action. Do you maybe expound upon that loop a little bit? Because that's a very interesting visual.
So yeah, he actually came up with he took that idea from military strategy, and apparently there was a Air Force officer who many years ago developed what he called that, observe, orient, detect, and act, the OODA loop. That's the actual name. He was using it for military tactics, and a lot of that is useful in the GRC world. I've heard from other people talking more from a risk management perspective, not necessarily about big data, but I think what they were saying applies, is that what you want is a feedback loop. You want to be able to collect a lot of data in your company, see what's going on, perhaps reach some conclusion about it. Okay, if we're seeing a big spike in travel and entertainment expenses, should we put a across-the-board cut on that or a freeze, or do we freeze it on some people, and what does that do? Do these people then behave differently? And you try to modulate behavior based on what the data is telling you. Something as simple as a freeze on travel and entertainment expenses, I don't know that technically would qualify as big data, because it's only one pile of data, and you're only looking at it for one analysis. How much is it? But if you are doing more complex sort of analysis to solve bigger problems, what are my chief risks among all my vendors? And then are the measures I'm putting in place to quell those risks, are they actually working? That's the sort of feedback loop you're going to want to create. And you're going to have to do it with multiple streams of data, multiple parties. I'm not saying this is easy. The other thing that Dunbill's essays left me feeling is that this is incredibly complex stuff. But the technology is there now to do these very complex sort of models. They're just going to get chopped up into tinier models, and each one gets solved a little bit. Then the answers get bundled back together into a bigger picture. But that's where Dunbill was going with that OODA loop, which that was in the first of the two essays that caught my eye. And I thought it was very telling. I had been reading and writing about risk mitigation for some other project I'm working on right now, where that's essentially what the person said was, what you want is a feedback loop to make sure that the controls you have are doing what you want. And this is the same sort of point that Dunbill was raising.
I guess in listening to you reading the blog post, and now I'm definitely going to have to go back and read the ebook. One of the things that I've always enjoyed about the compliance field is I felt like in many ways we're perhaps not at the creation, but we're certainly at a generational level where there are many new, different, and exciting changes going on. And the whole conversation around big data, while it typically doesn't focus on the compliance field, I think is opening up areas for inquiry analysis in ways that have never been made available to us before. And 5 years from now or 10 years from now, if you and I were having this conversation, it would be just a routine analysis. Yet now we are still struggling with not only how do we describe the problem we want to solve, but then someone's going to have to solve it. And I just find that inherently fascinating and enjoyable to think about.
I could not agree with you more. Yeah, I really do think that a lot of the problems we're talking about now, we're trying to game out, this is the result that we want, so we reverse engineer from there. We talk about how these things are going to have to work and huge technical challenges. This is all very similar to when we were all trying to launch websites in 1993 and 94. And how are we going to do this? And we were stuck on things like, if you wanted to present data on a web page, you had to build a table. And in HTML, building a table is just a nightmare. And you had to experiment 9 different ways to see if you could get the table to look the way you want it to. These days, it's all automated to build any sort of a web page, and a table is a breeze. People don't even understand what technical chops are required by the computer to build a table, because it's all gone away. I suspect a lot of that will follow the similar path like 10, 20 years from now. that so much more sophisticated analysis we'll be able to do just because we want to be able to do it. We won't have to think much about it. That's my hope anyways. And there's some very bright big data people working on this stuff. That's what they want to give we mere mortals in compliance like you and me and everybody else. They know that's how we want it to work. Yeah.
So let me, we've just got a few minutes left, but I have wanted to ask you this, fair amount different from big data, but perhaps not, which is the Panama Papers. We haven't had a chance to discuss that, and I would just ask, do you have any initial impressions or initial thoughts, even if it's from your journalism hat?
It's funny, actually. One thing that struck me is specifically because I was in Moscow when a lot of the Panama Papers sort of broke in this last week. A fair number of people overseas wonder if the American government is behind this. I have no idea if that is true or not, and I don't actually think so because it looks to me like there were too many journalists working on this project at the same time. But I suspect this is going to wind up becoming a political governance and corporate governance sort of a question. What do compliance officers think about it? How is it relevant to them? I don't know, but for corporate governance people, it really is a big tone at the top warning. That we see so many people professing that they want honesty and fair dealings, and yet they're connected to the Panama Papers. Somebody like David Cameron, the British Prime Minister, who is calling for a tax fairness conference next month, while he has been named as benefiting from one of these tax shelters. That makes it hard. That's going to be awkward.
Yes.
I'll be curious to see how much the Panama Papers illuminate how governmental corruption actually works. So if Vladimir Putin really did fund $2 billion worth of monies away off to some Panama-supported tax shelter, how do you actually do that? I don't know that we've seen a whole lot of information on how that really works, but I suspect we're going to, and it's going to be pretty interesting.
And the thing that struck me was, which is the shoe is yet to drop because it has focused on both political and the tax evasion implications out of the gate, is that for every significant bribe that is paid, either in violation of the FCPA or other national anti-corruption legislation, there's corresponding money laundering because you have to hide the money somewhere. And it's certainly not true if the bribe is a gift or a watch or a trip to Disneyland or something like that. But if it's multiple thousands or multiple millions of dollars, that money has to be laundered somewhere. So I think once maybe we get past this initial wave of politicians and tax evaders, there may be more information about shell companies where money was laundered. And it struck me that's the other shoe that the DOJ has wanted to go after, but it's the FCPA does not speak to that. So that's really what kind of struck me out of the gate, and something I'm waiting to have more revealed upon.
I think that will be fascinating to see. Yeah, the mechanics of how corruption works end to end. It is sort of a closed loop. Every bribe that gets paid somewhere, that money winds up somewhere else, and I could not agree with you more. Again, it'll be great to see examples of how this actually works after the bribe leaves. Where does it go? Who knows? I guess maybe it goes to some Panama company.
Well, Matt, as always, it's been way too much fun, so I look forward to continuing the conversation sooner rather than later.
All right. Take care, Tom. Thank you.